Sam, welcome to the Tech 45 podcast. I'm so glad you could join me today. So thanks for making time for this on a Friday afternoon, Friday evening. If you don't mind briefly introducing yourself to my 14 subscribers, go for it. Who are you,
Yeah,
Sam?
absolutely. First, thanks for having me, and very humbled that I got the invitation to be on the podcast. I will say I am one of the 14 subscribers, and I have listened to a few of the episodes.
Yes.
Uh, so yeah,
Cool.
Sam Shin. I'm a Marine gunner, Infantry Weapons Officer in the Marine Corps. Been in about 21 years now. Currently working at Marine Corps Systems Command with the acquisition side, primarily with weapons. But I think if the audience knows what a Marine gunner is, like kind of like that, kind of being able to pivot across the entire line. So essentially, as General Walsh, my commanding officer said it, like if the infantry walks on it, talks on it, looks through it, shoots it, wears it, like you should have a hand in it. So being able to do that and then balancing that with family life. I'm married, no kids, currently living in Washington, D.C. And then this summer, hopefully go back to the Fleet Marine Force and do a nice send off from there. I'm going to retire and try to achieve some personal goals that I have.
Amazing. No, amazing. So you infantry. When I hear that word, it kind of it makes me feel a certain way. I mean, you joined the military. I assume well, right during the GWAT era, right? Were you did you join post 9/11?
I did.
Yeah.
So I just vividly remember where I was when 9/11 happened. I think a lot of us in our generation understand where that was and how pivotal moment that was for us. Uh, so yeah, it happened a year before I could join, and then when it happened, I knew right then and there with a few of my friends that we had that calling to serve our country and do our duty. So I planned initially to stay in for 4 years. Not for the benefits or anything, but I come from an immigrant family, and I think we gained the American dream. We went from being extremely poor, my family of like 30 just on my dad's side. We all lived in a motel in West Memphis, and rented most of the rooms there, and now I feel like we're like upper middle class, and I think those opportunities came with the American dream. And I feel like at that time in high school, I needed to give back to the country that gave something to us. And 20 years later, still really enjoying what I do and the influence I'm uh, giving to the back to the Marine Corps.
Ah, I love that so much, Sam. I you joined for similar reasons why I joined. It was the 9/11 certainly sent 12-year-old me kind of over the edge. I already thought about a career in the military, and my grandfather served in the Korean War, and it was kind of already on my mind. I've kind of already had an inkling to join, kind of a combination of the sense of adventure and the sense of service, which you eloquently described. I did feel a sense of obligation to this country. I felt like growing up, I had a lot of opportunities. Based on my geographic origins that a lot of people in the world just don't have, and I think I want to highlight that in the U.S. we have a lot, and we have a lot of opportunities where the amount of effort you put in is typically equal to the opportunity that you get out, which is not typical, I would say, around the world. I would say it's pretty rare, and so for you to kind of echo that as a reason for joining and a reason to serve is really powerful. Did you join as an infantryman, Sam?
Yeah, so I came in as an infantryman. Honestly, when you just a second ago said you kind of had a prior thought of going into the service. I had zero inclination that I was going to join the military at all. Like I was going to go to a community college, try to get into college. 9/11 happened, and then that became kind of like a priority. When I went to the recruiter, I didn't even know the Marine Corps had any other jobs than the infantry. So when
Yeah.
after I took the ASVAB and whatnot, and assuming I scored fairly high, so he was giving me options to be like a linguist or like a crypto guy, and I was like, I have no idea what that is. Like I just signed me up for the infantry, and he was honestly trying to talk me out of it, uh,
That's
but
so
kind of
funny.
stayed firm, and he joined the infantry. I was a machine gunner with Fox Company 2-1, did a few deployments with them, and then took the indoc for reconnaissance, Marine Recon, and then did fairly well there, and then did 15 years at Recon and Force Recon, and decided to take the path of the gunner, put my package in. That's a whole nother story why I pivoted into that, and then went back to the infantry. Did it with 337 over at 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, and 29 Palms. Kicking and screaming the whole way there, but I wouldn't trade that time for anything now. Love those
Yeah.
guys. And then an opportunity showed up where timing and luck, I got to had the opportunity to go back to be the 1st Reconnaissance Battalion gunner with Colonel Armis, and dream job. Took that, and then they plucked me out. One of my mentors that worked already in the National Capital Region, he was at PPNO, was like, "Hey, I think you'd be a good fit for the National Capital Region over at Systems Command." And I was like, "Absolutely not. I do not want to go there." And I think quote unquote, he said, "That's why you're the perfect guy for the job." I was like, so,
Yeah.
and super grateful for everything I've learned here, and like learning at this level of how the Marine Corps works, especially on the business side, I think has set me up and changed kind of like the course I wanted to take when I retired. And I think I have a much higher aspirations and aim points and goals in my life now that I think is achievable with some of the mentors and ecosystem that I've built through friendships through this job.
Ah, it's so cool to hear. Yeah, it's a real, and I'm speaking for myself, and I think I'm speaking for you based on what you just told me. A real infantry leader never wants to come off the line.
Mhm.
Rarely. At least the infantry leaders I knew, non-commissioned officers, officers, they warrant officers, if you include some of the soft elements that I'm
Mhm.
friends with, they want to stay on the line. They want to be with the guys. They want to be the tip of the spear. They want to be the direct effort in everything they
Mhm.
do. And that sounds like what you're describing. And so, for those that are not familiar with how the Marine Corps is set up, what Sam described is he enlisted as an infantryman, like so many people do in the Army and the Marine Corps. And then he transitioned to a reconnaissance unit, which is a specialized unit within the Marine Corps that you essentially have to try out for. And these are elements of top tier soft units that are kind of embedded in our military. So, and then maybe you probably are better to set up to discuss this, but can you describe to the audience that what was the decision point for you to pursue a career as a gunner?
So, great question. And I didn't know what a Marine gunner was, or I guess the proper title or billet is Infantry Weapons Officer, until I got to the School of Infantry and got plugged to be an instructor there and get my time back over at the schoolhouse. At that time, I met other gunners like Matt Anderson, Tony Vigiani, that
Yep.
consider mentors, and kind of saw the impact they had and the influence they had alongside with a commanding officer. And I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, if I'm gonna try to make this a career, like I want to try to get as high as possible, not selfishly, but just to make an impact of for the Lance Corporal to be what I like to say, and my other buddy AJ Pachuti likes to say, we like to be the people's champion, and always think of the Lance Corporal on the line. And I think that thought process and that viewpoint is lost a lot of times, especially up here in the capital region, through the bureaucratic process. We're thinking about the much higher super macro picture, but we don't really understand like at the micro level like how that's going to affect the lance corporal. Like, I don't want the lance corporal to gain another 10 pounds because we need this much more lethality. I think it's a balancing act, and I think some of us in the room just need to hyper focus on that lance corporal and what the squad is providing us in the future fight.
Yeah, I agree. And Sam's job right now, for those that are not in the acquisitions world and not affiliated with the military or the many vendors that support the military, Sam is hyper focused on picking equipment and technologies that are going to be a benefit to the soldier on the ground. The soldier that's carrying the rucksack 25 kilometers through southern Afghanistan or through eastern Afghanistan, through the mountains of Afghanistan that Sam's probably been to multiple times. So Sam has lived it. Sam has carried that equipment. He knows what works, what doesn't work in a combat situation. in an austere environment. There's so many things to think about. And if you're, for lack of a better term, if you're an office worker in this acquisitions apparatus, you might not know what to look for, and you might not know some of the pitfalls of some of these new technologies unless you've done it. And that's the disconnect that I've seen in this industry, is that there could be a phenomenal technology. It could be one of the the best optic, the best widget you've ever seen, but it overheats. When
Mhm.
the ambient temperature gets over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, it overheats. So what good's that going to do you in a combat scenario? So there's little,
Absolutely.
yeah. I'm sure you've seen that where, like, man, tech's awesome, but like this won't survive in the situations that I've been through. I don't know. That's how I feel from a
No, I
durability.
completely agree with you. I think we have some of the best engineers, in the country working with us. The thing is, they don't have any personal experience, just like you said, in that those combat or dynamic just scenarios in general, and they're always asking me just as an advisor, like what I think about this. Because and I when I teach the class to the new incoming gunners over at the basic school, the example I like to use is like these engineers, and they'll work off the requirement that they're given, or they'll make a rifle that shoots 2,000 meters at sub-minute an angle, and it weighs 4 pounds, but the mag release button's on the barrel. Because they have
Yep.
zero concept that the functionality and the ergonomics and buttonology, impedes like how we operate and employ that weapon system. So
Totally.
like that's where I come in and give them my viewpoints and adjust before that final form factor comes into play. But yeah, those are really good examples. Yeah, definitely. I think
Yeah.
that relationship with industry and our engineers and building prototypes and trying to get a final product uh, is extremely important.
Yeah. The other thing I meant to say too, I agree with everything you're saying. The other thing that's kind of cool, and this is something that gets, I got tripped up on as a mid-level, company grade officer in an infantry unit. What you guys are doing in the National Capital Region here around the DC area, you guys are looking for emerging threats that the Lance Corporal can't see, right? You're looking at emerging threats, based on a lot of stuff that we know that, we keep close hold here in the DoD. Threats that might be developing and might not be a real threat for 10, 20 years. With that Lance Corporal that you're describing. And I think that's really cool. And I always try to encourage anybody that's involved in acquisitions. That's what you guys are doing. You guys, it might not be, the job that you want most, but you're there to identify and seek, countermeasures for emerging threats that are out there. And I think that's so cool. I think that's something that I wanted to highlight. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of unpack what you just said is, I think, and I'm probably gonna rewind this a little bit, and this because it's this topic stuck in my head is I felt like a lot of the guys that come that want this job and this billet now, like they of course they want to stay on the ground. I think just messaging at a certain point is like, look, you need to take that experience and kind of affect it at the macro level, like everything, all your awards and your relevancy can't be kinetic anymore. Like you're like in this job, you're not going to see those awards for 8 to 10 years, depending on the acquisition process and where it is in the early and mid stages. And to couple that with what you just said, I think it's a balancing act of us working with PPNO, CDNI, and the Fleet Marine Force, because those guys on the ground see it year in and year out when they do these theater security cooperation exercises. They do adjustments to strategic level planning, and we take all that and there's vessels and pathways to update, at our level to make sure we get the best equipment and fill those capability gaps that we think are critical, fund
totally.
it for the future. And just like you said, we're trying to project this thing in a crystal ball 10, 15 years out. uh, and things are so dynamic here for surprisingly things are very dynamic for how slow the bureaucratic and acquisition process is.
Yeah,
uh,
sure.
Very much so. And I'm sure just as much, or I would say even better than I do, with your personal experience in the industry and in the military.
Yeah, it's interesting to see both sides. It's when I was in the military, I didn't have any connection to the companies that manufactured the equipment that we used. When I picked up an M240 Bravo for the first time, I was like, okay, in my head, this is young, second lieutenant, dumb lieutenant, second lieutenant Jack Ryan. I was like, oh, this is, some factory that the Army owns and
Hmm.
runs to build, weapon systems for our infantrymen. And I was like, oh man, how hard could it be? And then you go into industry and you don't understand, like, people are so hyper disciplined and they're hyper focused on one or two technologies throughout their career in the defense world that they get so good at it. The hyper specialization is what makes
Hmm.
our defense tech so good.
Hmm.
And I had no idea it was so difficult to manufacture a 240 Bravo, or even something like what I thought it was just a piece of steel and titanium. It's much more difficult than we make it out to be, and part of that, which I agree with, is due to the high quality standards that the DoD holds.
Hmm.
So it's got to go through a ton of mean rounds between failures, mean round between stoppages. It's got to go through extensive environmental testing through a myriad of temperatures, sandy conditions, wet conditions, plugged bore testing. My gosh, I mean, just that's just for one system. Like every other system, including the electronics that the DoD buys, goes through similar rigor in testing and development, which is cool. And that's cool that you're
Absolutely.
involved in that. So I mean, it's like you see that, and the way I've heard it said is like that piece of equipment has to work every single time in the
I
worst
mean, our
conditions.
blast underwear go the same testing as like our 240.
Blast underwear. Okay, I got to show the audience this because the blast. Okay, hang on. Blast underwear. Let me see if I can throw this up on the screen. I don't even know if I can find these.
Which is a real thing. I remember when they passed those out.
Gosh. Oh, there's a bunch of like joke like boxers that are like, of course, blast underwear,
Please don't
IED. I'll
put
put
like a
IED
used
in
pair
there.
up there.
Okay, here it is. Here it is. I think this is what you're referring to. I'm gonna throw this on the screen so for those that didn't have to wear these, they know exactly what I'm talking about here. Okay, blast underwear. Let me share this real quick. So for the listeners who aren't watching, Sam and I are talking about a ballistic reinforced, like armor Kevlar reinforced boxer briefs that I think Sam and I both had to wear. I know I had to wear it. I'm sure you
Yes.
did
Oh
too.
yeah. Oh yeah.
If you spent any time in RC South, you definitely did.
I mean, I think
But
a lot of people voluntarily wore it. I don't think anybody just didn't want to wear it, but just because of the high threat of the IEDs, even if there was an inkling
yeah,
that it could save your essentially your manhood, then you're gonna wear it.
no,
Oh,
totally.
yep.
So just for those that, just so you guys can track along with Sam and I, there's Kevlar inserts in these boxer briefs. They're meant to breathe a little bit, but they're mainly the fabric is intended to be fire retardant. It's designed to be fire retardant. But there's Kevlar inserts. I think it's a Kevlar material that protect your femoral arteries. So
Yep.
along the inner leg, which is where you would want to put a tourniquet if you had any sort of an IED blast incident or any sort of trauma on the upper leg, you'd want to put a tourniquet up in here. And there's just a
Absolutely.
ton of blood flow in the groin here. So these man, we could do a whole podcast on ballistic underwear.
Yeah.
I'm gonna sorry. I go down rabbit holes,
I see
but
you getting kind of excited about it. So
I hadn't heard blast underwear, and like if you said those two words together with most human beings, like they'd be like blast underwear. Like there's no context. But when you
yeah,
said it, I was like I know
yeah,
exactly what you're talking about.
immediately.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
was like
I remember
yeah.
the last time I had it on. I still feel it.
Yeah. Oh, so uncomfortable, so itchy. Yeah, we had the blast underwear, and then we had like the tactical diaper, the girdle
Yep,
that went over it. Yeah. So I think that was
man.
an Army program record, probably maybe.
Oh yeah, and I feel like at a certain point, like safety just got, you know, over hyper focused out there, and like some of the gear that we went, I feel like I was just, at one point I felt like I was RoboCop,
Oh,
with some
dude,
of the stuff that was coming
same.
out and mandatory, like we lost all mobility, some situational awareness because we had to wear full face masks. I think I think we just had a ton of money at that time, especially now that I'm sitting at this job. We had to spend money. What are we going to buy? And these things, and people that had to answer to Congress for some of the injuries that were coming out in theater. So like, I totally understand now. And whoever was out there, I'm sorry for all the complaining I did. uh, but definitely, like now, I think it's a much more balancing act, and I think that's why this job is very important. We give it a fresh viewpoint of realism and how it's going to affect our employment concept. Uh, and it doesn't really enable the squad and make it better, because yeah, just because the gun we give the squad a more lethal gun doesn't make the squad more lethal. Like it's a holistic look of training, sustainment, and how we're going to execute with that new system.
Totally agree. You hit the nail on the head, and that's why I want to pivot from the equipment. All my friends that have either served in the military, some law enforcement, but no military, and then some are just like really into this tactical equipment. They watch a lot of Grand Thumb and all this other stuff. So no, yeah, yeah. So they
He
get into
puts out really
these.
good stuff. I'm
He
just
does. I love his content. Yeah, 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 yeah. I need to ask him. Maybe he'll join us on the podcast next time. Um, so one thing that I want to get away from, you and I could talk gear all day. That's obvious to me.
Mhm,
Because I think we've had similar experiences. We've had similar shared experiences that require this gear. But you're right. The gear is not as important. I tell all my friends this. I tell them, they say, oh, what kind of, concealed carry should I get? Blah, blah, blah. What kind of belt should I get? What kind of shoes should I get? I'm like, none of that matters. I'm like, how often are you doing cardio a week?
mhm.
The person holistically, like you said, the training, the discipline, the cohesion at the squad and platoon level. What I wanted to ask you, Sam, is how do you get the best out of those soldiers in the worst possible situations, the worst environments? You just did a 24-hour patrol. You've been outside the wire for a week. I'm just kind of spitballing situations I've been in. How do you get the best out of your people as a leader under the worst possible conditions?
That's a really great question, and if I had the answer to that, I'm sure I'd be a millionaire or some motivational speaker. I'll give you my personal viewpoint on it, and I've been very fortunate in my career because I got to mold and lead reconnaissance Marines. When I was
Oh,
at 2-1, Victor Fox Company 2-1, I was a lance corporal. So if I saw a cross rifles on some chevrons, like I think I was turning the other way. Uh, when I actually, took my first leadership position, I think, and I had to grow as a leader. But now that, I think I've grown into my, I guess, foundational like leadership style and
yep,
approach is that I think a lot of hardships bring camaraderie. So like, with when I got my first team, every month, every third Thursday of the month, we would do a 25-mile hike. I don't care what time it was, we would do it together. We would all go. I think that not only prepped us, but we got to suffer together and talk about a lot of things. You bond together during those moments, and if you and what I used to tell the guys, especially in training, I know it's a cliche, but hard training saves lives.
yeah,
I would tell them every rush we would do, every squat we would do, every lunge we would do would just make the real mission easier. I think thankfully, multiple teams I got to lead into combat took hold of that, and we always trained really hard. And I think the expectation within the reconnaissance community is fairly high too. Uh, and then when I transitioned over to 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines as a Marine gunner, I wasn't essentially in a leadership position, but I think I was more of like a mentoring role. I made sure I introduced myself at the squad leader level. I got all the platoon commanders, company commanders, open door policy, because the Marine gunner is kind of like in a very gray area. Like we can move laterally between the enlisted, and it doesn't look. I guess if fratricide is the right word, it
yep.
doesn't look like that.
I hear you.
So man, these some of these corporals and sergeants, like they were incredible. Like, and again, I was super fortunate with third battalion, 7th Marines, and I can name like all those squad leaders, and I hope they're still in, and they still reach out to me for advice here and there. Uh, but again, I would try to mentor them in that, and thankfully, 7th Marine Regiment, like in 29 pounds, I feel like those Marines are just a different breed, and you don't understand that until you go out there. Because I was always a Camp Pendleton kid, and then when I got to 29 pounds, it was a whole different game. Like those guys train, like I would have to pull them back on the weekends and be like just because you're in the field doesn't make you more proficient, you know. Uh, so I think that kind of hard training and suffering through together, and obviously, as long as you're I guess mildly safe about it, and understanding like the limits of each guy. I was able to push individually. I knew where each guy stood, and I could individually make plans and certain leadership styles to approach each guy. So, like if one would get angry, I knew I had to be a little bit more nicer to him. If one guy could take it, I know he wanted to get pushed harder. And then you can identify these guys and put them in leadership positions as well, and give them more responsibility, less responsibility, put them in roles that give them more strength. And I think through all that, and if the team does well, like everybody kind of elevates in that position. Unfortunately, like some of the scout guys that were in my team, they weren't built to be team leaders, and not everybody is. But we give them that opportunity. I think some of them just wasn't there. Some of that just wasn't their strength. But some of the assistant team leaders I had became phenomenal team leaders. Took guys on deployment, and I hope they took some of the stuff I taught them, and I applied that over into their foundation, into their leadership foundation. But yeah, I know that was kind of a long answer to your short question, but that's kind of the approach I've always had. I never yell. I think, especially in this generation, I feel like uh, it's a different delivery for these guys to internalize and digest what you want them to learn. So I would just talk to him like a grown man. And I think again, the recon community, it was a big boy rules. Like you either perform, you don't. And I've told
Yep.
him straight up, like I don't care uh, if you're trying your best. Like I honestly don't care if you don't meet the standard, you don't meet the standard. Like no one's gonna care if you try your best. Like I don't care. Like if the standard's running 5 miles and 50 minutes and rucking it, like that's the standard. That's what everybody has to do.
Oh, man, you said so many great things in there that you, that someone that is a leadership coach, like, but you're not a leadership coach. Like you've actually lived it. You've lived it. Like you've been a leader your whole life, pretty much. I mean, most of your career. I imagine you were put in a leadership position probably year 2 or 3 in the Marine Corps, if maybe even earlier. So, 3 things I heard you say out of that incredible answer, by the way. Um, Unit cohesion. So that's the collective. How do you bring the motivation of the collective up? And I agree with you. Collective training, shared suffering, cohesion, communication across the squad or
Hmm.
the platoon or whatever organization you're a part of, critical. So cohesion across the unit, across the collective, individual tailoring. So you are tailoring your leadership style to the individual, which is critical. A lot of people don't do that. They have this leadership style that's just kind of, I don't want to say cookie cutter, but it's just applied to every individual the same way.
Hmm.
And then standards. I want to talk about standards because the Marine Corps does it so well. And anytime I sent my squad leader or team leader to Camp Leatherneck when I was in RC South for training, sometimes we would send them over just to get trained on counter IED measures, because you guys would use different TTPs than us,
Hmm.
and they would always come back and be like, "Oh my God, like those guys are so well disciplined," and they always came back saying that, and I've seen that in my career too. Is just Marine Corps doesn't allow deviations from standards, especially imagine in the reconnaissance community. That does 2 things. I mean, that kind of puts a boot in people's ass, saying, "Hey,
Hmm.
you guys is what you got to do." It's a binary pass fail. You either
Hmm.
meet the number or you don't. There's something to be said about that. And it also does a second thing, and maybe you can talk about this too, because I've talked to some people that are, from elite units that have said this too. Sometimes setting a high standard like that weeds out the weak people that you really don't want around your top performers. Is that cruel to say that? But I mean, there's some truth in that. Like it's almost like you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and if you have weak performers, they're typically not you're the best part of your culture either, right? Did you experience that at all in your career, where like if you were able to remove the weak performers, it brought the collective higher and it was kind of better for the organization? I know that's cruel, but
No, I don't think it's cruel at all. I think that's just,
it's the
I
way it
think that's
is.
factual and truthful.
Yeah,
Like if you're gonna have a
yeah,
high performing individual, then you're gonna have a high performing team.
right.
So, uh, no, I completely agree with you. Like I think our first platoon before my first deployment with Recon, like our platoon sergeant went through 17 people before we like kind of stabilized.
Yeah.
I think we were all kind of like in fear every time we went into the office that it was like it was like preseason at the NFL. Like, oh man, I'm gonna get cut this year. I'm gonna get cut now, or we have a bad send a bad report in during training, or we would either slow the team down. Uh, I think that kind of pressure is important, and I truly believe that because if the first time you're gonna feel that like minimal pressure and you're gonna your personality and your emotions and mental stability fracture at that moment, I was like, what good are you in the combat,
That's a good
like
point.
so like
I never thought about
having
that.
that stress baseline, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional baseline continue to go up, and I think that's why a good training plan is so important. Like I remember, like, when I actually became a team leader, like, we had, the latitude to build out our entire, platoon training plan, and I would make sure, like, incrementally, like, our baseline would continue to go up and, X things. I would make sure we would have, like I said, a training event that sucked every month. Either we would do, like, an 8K fin, or we would go hike 20 miles, and not only did we get stronger, that kinda established our baseline. So, like, when I was in Afghanistan, I remember we had like a 30 click patrol, with 100-pound rucks on,
Yep.
behind, deep behind enemy lines. And like, at least physically, there was nothing that was that hard about it, and I think, that type model series training has a definite place in the military. Unfortunately, I don't really see that often anymore. And I think everybody's trying to be a friend. Of course, there's a hierarchy in the military, especially within my team, especially with my teams. At least my approach was, look, like we're all flat, but there's going to be a certain level of respect. Like if I tell you to do something, you're gonna do it. Like if not, like you don't understand who the leader is in this, and who's going to have the executive decision. And I think if everybody's trying to be nice to each other and falter, like that's when not only discipline, because at certain times, like it's good to after a patrol, like when we do our after actions, like I want everybody in the discussion. So you want
Yep.
to kind of cultivate that, environment to where it's everyone's welcoming. No one's gonna get mad or fired or we duke it out right there. And like there's been times where me and my captain, we literally did the man dance in
It's all right.
Afghanistan,
That's all right.
and we walked out of it, completely fine. And then there's times where like in a dynamic situation, I just need you to shut the up and do this, you know.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah. There's time sensitive and there's life sensitive situations that they're not conducive to having a back and forth discussion about something.
Yeah,
The decision has to be made now because sometimes a lack of decision is even worse than making the wrong decision. Sometimes that's the worst thing you can do is just not act. You know,
absolutely. And I think
yeah,
that was like the emotional training I was talking about. Like in those training events, I made sure like we had those discussions, and the first time I yelled at them wasn't in combat or in on deployment. It was throughout the entire training pipeline. So they knew what to expect from me. Like there was a consistent leadership style coming from me, and how I talked to them, how I walked to them, how I looked at them, and no one was confused at like where they were, at least for me, in within my team. And I treated everybody with respect. And as long as you performed, you were still within the team. And if you were faltering, I will let you know straight up.
yeah. So there's no guesswork. I think
No,
that a lot that stresses a lot of people out is not knowing. And I'm sure you've encountered this. I've encountered this both in the military and in the civilian side of my career, where I've seen leaders, and I'm guilty of this too. You're probably way better at this. You're just a very direct person, and that's something I'm striving to be. But you're not doing someone any favors by not telling them that they suck.
absolutely.
Like because
I
in
think
their
you're
mind they're like, I'm awesome. I'm doing great things. But yeah, I think people deserve to know, and I think that's becoming a common theme in the corporate world that you're seeing. I think Netflix is big about this, where like they say feedback is a gift,
Mhm.
and it's in their corporate ethics and their corporate structure to give open and honest feedback often and to the point. This is kind of cool. Never thought about this, but they consider themselves all a group of high performers, and they are. The profitability of the company shows that. But what they do is they have regular conversations where, like, if you and I were working together, and let's say I was reporting to you, like you're my manager, me and Sam would have regular discussions about, hey, if we were trying to hire for my role, would you hire me again? Or hey, Sam, if Google or one other tech company gave me a job offer, would you counter to make me stay here? And that's a good litmus test.
Oh yeah.
Would you be willing to fight to keep the person on your team, or would you kind of in the back of your head you're like, oh, I kind of want them to go? Like, no,
No,
but
I
they have
no, I completely agree with you. And I use that same test. I think it's just in a different format. So when I ask, and the reconnaissance community is fairly small. I mean, you're 2 phone calls away from knowing the person. So
oh
like,
man, so cool.
if like if someone was like came up to me or came up to you, it was like, is or at least for me, I don't ask people like, oh, is he a really good reconnaissance marine or would you do? I was like, would you take him in your team? If you had to deploy tomorrow, would you take him in your team? And rapidly you'll see like, well, probably okay. Well, then like that's not who I'm looking for, because at the
Yeah,
end of the day, like operation, we all know at a baseline like what's applicable and what you have to do to perform at all levels, because it's a holistic thing. It's like, oh, you could be good at this, you could be good at that. Would you take them in your team if you had to deploy? No, that's all I need to know. And
yeah,
that that
that's
that
yeah,
that 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 answer just is tidal waves, more than like trying to explain like, is he a good dude and trying to figure this thing out, and that's the bottom line matrix. And it's just like you said, which is like, would you hire me? No. Like, no, okay, well, where can I improve? You know?
yeah. It's better to know. And that you're not really doing anybody favors by stringing them along. And sometimes it's just a wrong fit. Like they're just not. Not everyone's fit to be a recon in a recon platoon. That's the bottom line. Like just that's the reality of the situation. So sometimes it's just a wrong fit. It's like the wrong person for the wrong opportunity. Sometimes the person's just a dirtbag. That happens like probably another third of the time. I think a third of the time it's the wrong fit for the person. A third of the time the person's just a dirtbag, and a third of the time, it's probably got some other reason that you can't quite pinpoint. But yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. That's a good litmus test. Would you deploy with them?
Yeah. And I think, I lost my train of thought for a second. Like what you said, I think there was it's gone. That thought's gone. I'm
No,
gonna,
you're
I'm
good.
gonna, I'm gonna grab it here in a second.
No. Keep hold on to that thought because I'll tell you a really interesting thing that I learned the other day. I listened to this podcast called My First Million. It's mainly an entrepreneurship podcast. It's not really necessarily a financial podcast, but they talk a little bit about money. And one of the things that one of the business owners they had on the show, Andrew Wilkinson, he owns a business that's an umbrella of like a bunch of different internet businesses. He owns like a bunch. I think it's a collective of like 20 or 30 companies. It's a very profitable company in general. And so he's got this firm. He wouldn't disclose the firm, but there's this firm that he uses when he's hiring an executive to fill a leadership role
Oh yeah.
within one of his portfolio companies. He said, of course, they're going to ask for references. As you go up in the ranks, either in the corporate world or in the DoD, people are going to want to know, what it was like to work with you or work for you or, work
Yep.
under you. So he takes it a step further. He's got this, call it a forensic reference checker, where it's a group of really talented I don't know, forensic researchers where they'll dig into your references. And this is like, I mean, this costs like 15, 20 grand per person to do this. This is something you should keep in mind though, because there's a huge void in the corporate world for this kind of stuff. But basically, they not only check your references, but they dig in and they find people that you worked with that maybe weren't on that reference list, because of course you're only going to give good references, right?
Of course.
And they find out, they talk to people that worked with that candidate before, and they kind of get to the bottom about what it was actually like to work with them,
I
which I
mean, that
thought was
sounds
kind of cool.
eerily close to the NFL draft where they'll talk to like the friends of friends. I
Totally.
I have heard of like rumors of that kind of process, and I mean that's totally understandable. I mean, you're talking especially in like venture capitalism or private equity. If you're looking for that executive, I mean, you're putting millions, like hoping that or betting on them really to increase that profit and revenue, so they
Precisely.
can so you can meet all the partners' expectations. And it came back into me, kind
Go
of
for
like
it.
what you
Yeah.
and what you were talking about. Like like trying to like a third being a dirtbag, and oh yeah, absolutely. There's going to be that 10%. I think, I wouldn't say it's a weakness, but my approach, like I try to give people the benefit of doubt, and I'll probably let them linger a little bit longer than I have to or should. I think that's where, well, at least I call it like emotional discipline, where like I think a lot of leaders now kind of don't understand that. And what I'm talking about is, I think in the military we all have a like the best leadership type is a type of stoicism. You know what I mean? Like be stoic, like no emotion, just do what you're told, kind of do the thing. I think tailoring like at the individual to maximize his performance. Uh, and then at a certain time, like you're gonna have to make a judgment call as a leader to see if he's gonna be either a liability or an asset within the team. And then obviously you're building a cohesive team, so it's not just one individual. So like I would like a lot of times I'm trying to look at that, but I have taken obviously there's only a small pool to look from. Like there's other teams, other deployments, other requirements, other priorities that people are fulfilling. So it's not like the pool is big. So you're kind of like juggling. Okay, who else is on the bench? Is this guy going to be good? And honestly, like I would just hyper focus on this one individual, and like I mean, they would 100% not like it because I would just uh, do probably unforgivable things to them. And like
Yeah.
till this day, like some of these guys, they still call me and like don't remember those guys. And I'm sure like 10 years from now, like we're gonna be at the VFW eating free sandwiches, and they're still gonna be talking about how I made them do like 1,000 burpees. Uh, but
Burpees are great.
that
Yeah.
that's that type model series suffering. Like my platoon, Bravo One, every year we do an annual get together. I think that's such a powerful thing. And some people have gotten into hard times. We've been there together, and some of these nonprofit events, that's been helping us, and just being there for each other. I think it's extremely important knowing that we're still there. It's still a same platoon. Like that friendship and that brotherhood hasn't gone anywhere. And I think that's once you put that distance and time between us, and there's other priorities, we start to lose that mindset. And then doing that every year just kind of brings it all back together. And we do it every year. I think this year we're doing it in Montana, and we try to go. And obviously everybody can't go, but just the effort and everybody puts into it is it's I think it's an amazing thing.
Spectacular. Yeah. I still talk to the squad leaders in my platoon. Dude, some of them every day. One of them, like at least once a month, we'll call each other. And it's the
It's
bonds
like it
you
just never
develop.
left off.
Oh, dude. You're giving me chills talking about this, man. The bonds you develop, well, especially let's talk about our experience in an infantry
Mhm.
unit, in a frontline unit, the bonds you develop in those types of environments, and you think back on it and how many hours you spent with them. Talk about 24/7 a day, 24/7, 365. Working every single day, sometimes within arm's length of each other. Or if you're on a patrol, maybe you want to space out a little bit more than arm's length. But you spend so much time with these people. So even if you only deployed with them for a year, you might have spent more time with that person than any best friend. I mean, anyone outside of your
100%.
spouse. I mean, outside of your spouse maybe, but holy crap! It's unbelievable how much time you invest in these people, and then seeing people move up the ranks, like you said. You mentioned it earlier in our interview. Oh, nothing brings me more joy than seeing someone that you felt like you had the right task conditions and standard for them to be successful,
Mhm.
and then they do it, and they step up to the plate, and then all of a sudden, I talk back on one of my team leaders that was getting promoted in Afghanistan. Now he's an E8. He's a first sergeant now.
Wow.
Probably
Yeah.
gonna go to Sergeant Major's Academy. And what a difference that guy's gonna make! Because I saw him make a difference in his fire team. I could see
Yeah.
the leadership characteristics shine through when he was only managing a handful of people. And I would have loved to see him as a first sergeant or even as a platoon sergeant.
Here, I
So,
still I
oh,
still think I'm a corporal. Like, uh, yeah, I still think I'm a corporal. Like, I can't believe it's been 20 years. It goes by
so
so quick.
fast.
Yeah,
It
so
does.
quick. Yeah, like that bond. Like when people ask me, like, what's the best thing about the military, or going to recon or going to the infantry or just the military in general, or the Marine Corps or the Army, I'm like, dude, you're gonna meet people that you're gonna stay connected with the rest of your life. You're gonna be closer to them than, you know, your blood brother